What's going on, guys? It is the Coaster Battleman here, bringing you an awesome coaster countdown, the top 10 roller coasters at Cedar Point, and I have done this coaster countdown, this same type of video, same exact video about Cedar Point and their best coasters several times already, and we're going to talk about the honorable mentions and then get into the video with the top 10. 14th is Cedar Creek Mine Ride. Quick story for you. Rode this coaster in the summer of 2016, thought it was pretty bad and rough and pretty mediocre, and haven't ridden it since. 13th, Blue Streak. I tend to ride this coaster at least once when I go, because I want to get the credit, why not? And Blue Streak, depending on your ride, or what row you're sitting in, you will get a good ride, a bad ride, or an average ride. 12th is Corkscrew. This coaster, first coaster to feature 3 inversions. I used to dislike this coaster even more, but overall, I've grown to think it's okay. And when I rode it the last 2 times, I rode it last time I came to Cedar Point. I got to ride it twice, and I thought it was okay. I didn't really mind it too much. Maybe depends on your height. If you're smaller, you'll get some head banging, but if you're a taller rider, you won't get as much head banging because your head is above the over the shoulder restraint. 11th is Magnum XL 200, first coaster over 200 feet. Unfortunately, when I got to go this past time in spring of 2017, unfortunately I couldn't get to ride Magnum because it was closed the whole time. But overall, on my ride experiences on Magnum, I've seen it to be better towards the end of the season. Out of my 2016 experiences at Cedar Point, Magnum is better at the end of the 2016 season, but towards the beginning of the season, it's not as good. But we're moving on to the coaster countdown. Number 10 is Iron Dragon, and I have grown to like this coaster quite a bit. Depending on where you sit, you may have a more intense ride. Like if you're in the back car, or one of the last 2 rows, you might get a fairly intense ride, with a nice, powerful, not the most powerful drop, but a fairly intense first drop and a fairly intense second drop. And the turns are a bit more intense at the end of the ride after that second drop, after the second lift hill. Sometimes this coaster is a lot more fun depending on where you're sitting. In the front, you can see everything, but it's not as intense. While in the back row, you do feel some nice intensity. Overall, not a bad coaster at all. Number 9 is Gemini, and this coaster would definitely be off the list if this was just one coaster, because if it was just one coaster, kind of like how Excalibur is at Valley Fair, this would be just a mediocre hybrid coaster with no inversions at all. It would just be another family coaster, but due to the fact that it's a racing roller coaster and it has 2 sides, this coaster is a very fun attraction, as you can high-five people on the other train, race your friends and family if they're on the other train. Overall, Gemini, very fun coaster. Definitely ride this with a group of 4 people or with a friend, because this is just one of those coasters you need to ride with someone because you want to duel against them. So, very fun coaster, Gemini, if it's racing. If it's not racing, it's more of a family coaster. Number 8 is Rugarou, and this coaster is actually a very fun coaster in my opinion. Overall, it hasn't really gotten higher on my list, kind of because there's better coasters at Cedar Point. But I don't mind this coaster. This is a pretty fun coaster, very fun first drop, the vertical loop, the dive loop, the incline loop. That's at a weird angle. Those are 3 very fun inversions. Overall, I don't really notice the trim on the first drop too much. It's not really killing the speed of the coaster. And overall, the spaghetti section with the corkscrew and a bunch of intense turns, that's a pretty fun section. And overall, this is just a fun coaster. It isn't as intense as probably some other B&Ms here, like Raptor, but overall, very fun coaster. Number 7 is Wicked Twister, and I know I meant to say roller coasters back there with Rugarou, saying it's not as intense as other coasters, so Wicked Twister, we're moving on to Wicked Twister. Wicked Twister, I've said that so many times, but okay, Wicked Twister, very fun, intimate launch coaster. The first launch is pretty fun. You just launch flying out of the station. You have to be in one of the first 2 to 3 rows to back 2 to 3 rows to have an enjoyable ride experience if you want a more intense ride. But if you don't like the roughness of the coaster due to its intensity up on the twisting spirals, go in the middle seats. But if you're in the very end of either side of the train, you're going to have a very intense ride experience on those twisters when the coaster launches up there. Overall, Wicked Twister is a very fun ride, and I always want to ride it at least once at Cedar Point. So, overall, Wicked Twister, pretty underrated ride at Cedar Point. It's not really loved as much by coaster enthusiasts as other people, but I'm one of those coaster enthusiasts who really likes it. Number 6 is Val Raven, and this coaster has been declining on my list for some reason. One, to me, every time I ride this, it just feels shorter. Even though I do have a lot of fun on this coaster, because that first drop is very fun. The first Immelman is very fun. There's some fun elements on here, like that 0G roll, dive loop, that final airtime hill is alright. There's some nice elements on this coaster. It's just too short. I just wish this coaster was longer. That's all. But very high quality coaster. Just wish it was longer. Number 5 is Raptor, and this coaster has an underrated ride time, in my opinion, because B&M inverts like the Batman the Ride clones are pretty short attractions, but Raptor, it just keeps going and going. Very intense coaster. The first lift hill, it's pretty good. But if you're in the back row, you're going to have a very intense ride. In the front row, it's intense, but not nearly as intense as if you're in the back. The first drop is very intense. The first vertical loop, or the only vertical loop, is very powerful. The double helix at the end of Raptor is very intense. The Cobra roll is probably the worst element on this, and it's still very intense, just the roughest part of the ride. There's some intense turns there in the ride. Overall, even with the mid-course brake run being on this coaster just keeps on twisting and turning. Very intense ride. Very good quality inversions. I just love Raptor. I've grown to love this coaster, and every time I ride it just seems to get better. Number 4 is Gatekeeper, and this coaster is a very fun B&M wing coaster in my opinion. Overall, this coaster was added in 2013, so it's only a few years old, but I've loved this coaster. It's grown on me to be loved. I used to like Val Raven more than Gatekeeper and Raptor, but Gatekeeper is definitely the best B&M at Cedar Point. The wing over drop is very fun. The keyhole elements are nice. The only problem with this coaster that I have is that the helix at the end of the ride is kind of mediocre. And if you're on an outer seat and not an inner seat on the wings, then you'll get a slightly more rough experience than if you're in the inner seat, but that doesn't affect this coaster. This coaster isn't unbearably rough at all. Very fun going past the keyhole towers. You feel like you're going to get your head or legs chopped off when going through them. And Gatekeeper, very fun wing coaster and very underrated ride at Cedar Point. Number 3 is Top Thrill Dragster, and this coaster, unfortunately, I couldn't get to ride back in the spring of 2017 in early May, opening weekend, when it was Top Thrill Coaster, because it broke down. Yeah, the high winds just made this coaster break down, but I love this ride. Even though I couldn't ride this coaster as Top Thrill Coaster, as Top Thrill Dragster, this coaster is very fun. Very intense launch. Very fun final drop. This coaster is just one of those intense coasters that's not a long ride. That first launch is just, oh my gosh, that's just the greatest launch ever on any coaster I've ridden. Very powerful launch. And the best ride experience I've ever gotten on this coaster was at night in the summer of 2016, front row. The bugs literally just covered you all over. The intensity was awesome. And overall, very fun coaster. Number 2 is Maverick. And Maverick, overall, very intense coaster. It has some intense ejector airtime hills, very intense first drop, some powerful bank turns. This is just one intense ride. It's just element after element after element, and even after the first half of the ride, when you stop in the tunnel that's under the station, you just fly out of there, launch, and just keep on going. The intensity of this coaster is amazing. And my favorite seats on this coaster are in the back row because you get the most intense ride experience with the first drop, giving you some insane ejector airtime. You're just getting flung out of there. But overall, Maverick, it's not my favorite coaster at Cedar Point, but it's the number 2 coaster I've ridden so far in my life. Number 1, Millennium Force. This is just the best coaster in the world. I've said other coasters are the best, but this is truly the best. Back row, it just makes this ride so much fun. Front row ride on Millennium Force I haven't gotten to do because of how much I love the back row, and the front row line is always long. So back row on Millennium Force, it's super fun. You have some intensity in the ride with that gray out before the first bank turn. Even though this coaster is kind of rattly, the first drop is amazing. And going up the cable lift hill, you're just accelerating up there. You're just pumped to ride. And going through the 2 tunnels, there are 2 tunnels on this ride. And after that first tunnel, you go into this twister section with a few bank turns and 2 airtime hills. And you feel like you're traveling back in time, in my opinion. Like you've traveled back in time to the dinosaurs is what my cousins have said about Millennium Force, because there are some dinosaur statues from dinosaurs alive that are over there, and it does make some theming to this coaster, like it's themed to time travel. And then you travel back out of the second tunnel, go into a nice ejector airtime hill, into the final bank turn where you're just sky high, just looking down at the line, and then you just slide into the brakes. This is just a fun coaster. Great ride time, great lift hill, great first drop, great airtime, great bank turns. 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more videos.